Well, here's the plant life cycle, the way that we looked at it um, where we left off, and it's kind of a nice, beautiful, symmetrical thing with the diploid sporophyte producing spores by meiosis, them developing by mitosis to make haploid gametophytes who make their gametes by mitosis, and they fuse together to form a diploid zygote that develops by mitosis to make a sporophyte. A nice sort of cycle, very relaxing and symmetrical and elegant. Let's take another look at the same sort of information but presented just in a different way. Circular. Here we have diploid in blue on the bottom, actually, haploid on the top. And this starts with a gametophyte. Notice they say gametophyte plant, emphasizing that these stages in the life cycle are plants. Mitosis produces gametes, which fuse together to form a diploid zygote that looks like an eyeball, and that develops by mitosis to form a sporophyte, which is a plant. Two different things that you can point to and say there's a plant, which develops which develops spores by meiosis, which undergo mitosis to form a new gametophyte plant. Same information, just presented a different way. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking what I would be thinking, which is I kind of get it with circles and dots and words, but what would be an example of a gametophyte? What does it look like? Well, what's a sporophyte? What do they actually look like? So let's take a look at exemplars of the plant kingdom. We're going to look at mosses, ferns, and flowers to represent the different innovations in evolution that have come up with different configurations of these things. We'll start with mosses. One of the things that characterizes mosses and other bryophytes, in addition to the fact that they're non-vascular, is that the stage of the life cycle that's dominant, that's conspicuous, that's long-lived, the one you'd notice, is the gametophyte. There's been a tendency through evolution for the gametophyte to be progressively smaller compared with the sporophyte. So most plants, if you see the plant, you're looking at a sporophyte, but not so with mosses and other bryophytes, i.e. hornworts and liverworts. So the gametophytes are what you see when you see, say, a bed of moss, and they produce gametes and gametangia. And like all non-seed plants, there's still kind of a requirement for water. The sperm need environmental water in order to get to the egg. They have to swim. The zygote, like all plants, the zygote develops within the gametangium. The embryo has a little protected area, and that's a plant feature, right? That's the thing I kind of like to think of as like a little pond. And here's a little surprise that you'll see coming up. The sporophyte remains attached to the gametophyte? What? I got to see that. So here's a sketch from a textbook that shows actual plants. So once again, diploid, blue, haploid, this tan color. And here we have some nice illustrations of moss gametophytes. So this is you recognize it as being a plant. It's a small thing about a centimeter tall with little leaves on it. It's upright, it's a stem, it's leafy, it's photosynthetic, it's a little plant. And in this illustration, there's male and female ones. They look alike, except that if you were to look at the tippy top through a microscope, you would see on the females some clusters of little microscopic, what look like bottles with eggs in them. And they actually are essentially bottles with eggs in them. They are the female gametangia, also known as Archegonia. And down at the bottom is the egg, and it's got an opening here through which sperm can swim. The male moss plants, through the microscope, you would see little clusters of little hot dog-like structures that are the Antheridia, the male gametangia. They burst open and release the sperm. And in this diagram, you'll notice that there's a lot of blue here. That's to signify that environmental water is necessary in order for the sperm to get to the egg. And when that happens, the fertilization takes place inside the Archegonium, down at the bottom. The egg is now fertilized. And the next step is the development of the sporophyte. And when I demonstrate this in real life, what I like to do is have a model, or maybe an actual moss plant situation, and one of these things, like what I just drew a circle around, a little leafy with this on top of it, and I say, how many plants am I holding? And it's sort of a trick question, because the answer would seem to be one, because it looks like a plant with a kind of structure of some sort on it. And the actual answer, of course, is two. Even though they're physically connected, this part here that I'm drawing a circle around now is the gametophyte, and this part that's with a stalk and a little box at the top is a separate plant. Well, it's not physically separate. That's the peculiarity of bryophytes, is that the sporophyte is permanently attached to its mother, basically. The sporophyte is parasitic of some nutrients and some physical support it gets from the female gametophyte. And you'll never see a sporophyte without a gametophyte. The gametophyte is always attached to the sporophyte that it came from. But genetically, they're two different plants. This sporophyte is the offspring. It's the kid of this gametophyte. They're physically together, but they are different individuals. One is a gametophyte, one is the sporophyte. And they're physically connected, and that's a peculiarity of bryophytes. What happens next is that the sporangium ripens to release spores, which are haploid single cells that develop by mitosis to form new gametophytes. So that's what sporophytes and gametophytes are in a moss. The gametophyte is a little moss plant that you'd recognize as such. The sporophytes, look carefully. If you see these little golf clubs on top, those are the sporophytes. You'll never see them without the gametophytes. Let's look at some pictures of mosses. Here's a little sketch from another book that shows same thing. Here's the gametophyte. Here's the sporophyte. Here's a close-up of the sporangium. It's got a lot of nice intricacy. Here's just some rough ways that they vary. Some mosses are upright with the gametophyte stem straight up and the sporophytes right on top. Some mosses are more branched and flat with the sporophytes sort of in the little axils of the branches. Just little differences in the growth form. So here's a moss growing on a tree. Most of what you see here is a nice leafy gametophyte, but here's a few sporophytes. And you can see that gametophyte is dominant. Here's a moss that has both sporophytes and gametophytes. Unlike many mosses that have fairly long stalks supporting the sporangium, this one is very short, and it's sort of immersed in the upper leaves. But nonetheless, there's a sporophyte here with a nice sporangium that's got some teeth that regulate the dispersal of spores, and that's a moss sporophyte and gametophyte. Here's a bed of moss on a branch, a stump, and see, it's gametophyte. There might be some sporophytes in there, but you can't really tell from this distance. The significant thing about bryophytes is the gametophytes are the dominant stage in the life cycle, and sporophytes, you might not notice them. Here's a close-up of the sporophytes of that moss, or one like it. You can see the stalk that supports the sporangium, and you can see some sporangia in different stages of development. This one here has these teeth that regulate the dispersal of spores. And this one has a little lid on it that hasn't released the spores yet. This one has a little cap. Some intricacy in sporophytes. Here's a little brick wall in front of my house, and oh god, these sweet gum fruits, they are such a pain. They hurt when you walk on them, especially barefoot. The mosses are on the brick wall, and here are these mosses. It's another one that has a short stalk, so the sporophyte doesn't stand up tall, but nonetheless, there they are. many sporophytes with their teeth that regulate the spore dispersal. And if you were to look at this moss at the right time of the year, which I think is very, very early spring, um, and some of the mosses, if you look through the microscope, would have these structures, and these are Archegonia. Um, this is a female moss through the microscope, and the structure here that kind of looks like a bottle with an egg in it, sort of is a bottle with an egg in it, in my estimation. It's an archegonium. The egg would be down here, and this is where the sperm would enter, and they're clustered together, and that's the female moss, Gametophyte. Nearby, another moss plant. You look at the tip through the microscope and you see these hot dog-like structures. These are Antheridia. These burst open and release sperm. So these are gametophytes, and that's proof they're making gametes. Some more mosses, sure. This is a railroad track in Powell, Ohio, where there's a very abundant moss called water measuring cord moss, Funaria hygrometrica. It's got sort of short sporophytes. I misspoke. I'm sorry. Anything but short sporophytes. Short gametophytes, and these beautiful tall sporophytes with these really slender seta that sort of bend and twist with changes in humidity, and these golf club-like asymmetrical sort of pear-shaped Sporangia. It's a very elegant moss. It's called Funaria hygrometrica, or sometimes called fire moss. It grows along campfires and burn areas. Here's a close-up of those elegant, beautiful sporangia of Funaria. Here's some more sporangia. This is a one called haircap moss, and its spores are released through little tiny pores at the rim of the mouth of the sporangium, kind of like a salt shaker. And when these are younger, they have a hairy covering, so they're called haircap mosses. Here they are, young. This structure here, I don't know if you can see the circles I'm making, but there's a structure that covers the sporangium when it's immature. And in this particular moss, it's sort of made of many hairs, so it's called polytrichum. That means many hairs. It's a very common woodland moss. Elegant, beautiful one. Here's one of these branched, layering flat mosses that have many sporophytes coming from where the branches are. So here we have the gametophyte at the bottom and the sporophytes on the top. Sometimes you'll see the gametophytes without the sporophytes, but never the other way around. Here's a close-up of the sporangia. Here's a close-up of the sporangia. These are the teeth of the sporophyte. This area around the mouth is called the peristome, which means around the mouth. And these teeth are actually remnants of cell walls. The cells are no longer alive. They respond to changes in atmospheric humidity. So if you were to breathe on this, you could see it open and close a little bit. It moves, even though these walls are not alive. They're like zombies. They're one of the few, my favorite things, which are parts of plants that move even though they're not alive. Moss peristome is one of them. There's some others too. And one of the things about botany, and bryophytes in particular, is that's engaging is the degree to which certain plants have an affinity, a fidelity, an attachment to certain types of substrates. In this area here is a rock house, a grotto in Hocking Hills. This is on a property that we would have gone to visit if there weren't a worldwide pandemic going on, darn pandemic. And it's cool and shady and acidic sandstone, kind of perpetually moist. And there's some plants that grow only in these types of environments, and this is one of them. It's a rarity globally, but it's common in the Appalachians. It's called sword moss, Bryoziphium norvegicum. In North America, it never produces sporophytes. It only produces gametophytes. It must reproduce asexually somehow, but it's an example of a beautiful, uncommon moss that grows in Ohio. So you should go out and explore it. So that's what the alternation of generations life cycle looks like in mosses. So let's take a break, and then next we'll take a look at what fern sporophytes and gametophytes are like. Thanks for watching. Come back soon.